intelligence gives power, and who has that power is a question that really matters. It matters for our democracies, so within each country, but it matters for the geopolitical stability of the world. And currently, the path on which we are is a world where, if AI continues to become more and more capable, there will be two countries calling the shots. So what about the other countries? Like, how do we make sure that everyone can sit at the table and that we choose a future for humanity collectively that isn't the domination of others thanks to the power that AI will give?
Welcome to the most interesting thing in AI from Rethink, the Atlantic's creative marketing studio, in collaboration with PwC, a leader in helping organizations use AI. If you were to pick the person who's most responsible for modern AI, there'd be a lot of choices, but a good one would be Yoshua Bengio. He wrote several of the foundational papers on neural networks, on attention, on some of the key concepts that make modern AI what it is. And then when ChatGPT came out and when this current boom started, he became one of the most articulate critics and voices of concern. Back then, he said he worried a lot about AI safety. Then, in the last year, he has changed a little bit in a way that I'm going to talk to him about, where he's become more optimistic. He still has his fears. He still has his concerns. He still sees the flaws in AI, but he's also been working through an organization he created called Law Zero to build something called Scientist AI. So he's both a creator of AI, skeptic, some of the hype about AI, still a builder, making tools to make AI safer. Here's my conversation with Yoshua Bengio. Yoshua Bengio, welcome to the most interesting thing in AI.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start in 2003 with one of your papers, quite a seminal paper, where you have the realization, or you publish the realization, that the meaning of words, sentences, and ideas can be embedded in vectors and strings of numbers in math. Tell me about that insight, and when you published it, the consequences that you could see of that.
So first, some early version of that insight actually came from work in the 80s by Jeff Hinton, where he was thinking of symbols that could be used as input for neural nets. But what I did with my collaborators is take this to the level of language modeling. Like if a neural net sees a sequence of words, can it actually make sense of these words and reproduce grammatically and semantically meaningful sentences? And of course, in those days, we didn't have the amount of data, the compute, but we were able to show that these neural nets with new architectures that we proposed to do that could actually match or improve on the existing statistical methods that computer scientists were using to capture how sequences of words, could look like. And that was the beginning of Gen AI, as we call it today, really.
I mean, it's this extraordinary realization that you can take all the complexity of linguistics and turn it into math, which is great because then it allows you to do all kinds of things, like 20 years later, make chat models. But it also has this consequence where you've taken this thing we can understand and see, language, and put it into this system that is harder to understand. So it's this both extraordinary and massively consequential paper.
Let's say that it's had a lot of citations.
Are you not the most cited computer scientist in the world?
According to Google Scholar. But in the work at that time, I think what's interesting to highlight is the ideas that I and others had that neural nets could internally capture meaning and abstractions, and that with deeper and deeper neural nets, we could have more and more complex abstractions emerging without us humans having to tell the machines what those abstractions should be. So what is going on inside the neural net is the neural net is constructing representations of things we feed in input and output.
One of the things that interests me the most about AI, and we've talked about it a little bit on stages before, is that it's hard for us when we look at an AI system to understand what is exactly happening inside of it. And my question for you is, do you think that our ability to understand what's going on in these vectors and these attention systems will ever catch up to the speed at which these models improve?
Well, at the current speed, I'm afraid we are in trouble.
Yeah.
The good news is there are also other ways of understanding what is going on without having to give meaning to particular elements of like which artificial neurons is doing what, which I think is more or less hopeless.
Yeah.
The beauty of mathematics is that it can give us handles on understanding and even on the behavior of these systems that we may not intuitively think possible, a priori.
I remember once interviewing Sam Altman, and he said that the thing that would make him most confident about good futures with AI, not bad futures, is a neuron by neuron understanding of what's going on. And what you're saying is that's not possible. It would be great, right? But it's not, or it's certainly not likely. But there's so many other things we can do, which I think actually squares with Altman's position now.
Well, we should definitely try to understand what is going on. And there's some, nice work in great part out of Anthropic, but now the other companies also to try to get some interpretation of what is going on. And that can be useful from a safety perspective. But I'm afraid it's always going to be a very rough understanding of what was happening because of the sheer complexity and the way that information is distributed in our brain as well as in these neural nets.
Let's move ahead to, ChatGPT comes out December of 2022. And the 2 years after that, you give a lot of commentary where you're helping to move the world to understand some of the risks. Tell me about that period, the risks you saw, and what you were trying to most importantly accomplish.
So the risk I saw is that we were on a path to build machines that would be intellectually at our level or superior to us in many different areas, and that it would be like opening a Pandora's box. And furthermore, that at least at that point, we had no clue how we could make sure these neural nets would do the things we actually want. Because these are not like normal programs where a programmer decides, in such and such circumstance, the computer will behave in this way. No, You don't get to decide this. You only give it experience, and then you get what you get.
Yeah.
And if we were to give experience to an entity that is smarter than us, and it ends up being, having bad intentions or intentions simply that collide with our values or our wishes or our future, we would be taking a huge risk. And in addition, even if we were to master, how we can make AIs do what we want, there's the question is who decides, right? So it's a political question, like who gets to decide how that intelligence is applied? Because intelligence can be a source of power. And what is democracy if not sharing power?
Yeah. So you're concerned both about, we're raising this baby tiger, we don't understand that it could become a large tiger and it might
eat us,
as opposed to just doing the tricks we ask it to do. And secondly, we don't even know when we have this large tiger, who's going to have the whip, who's going to be feeding it. And it won't just be one large tiger. It will be, I guess to stretch the metaphor, it'll be a large tiger that can breed extremely efficiently.
As many tigers as you have electricity to feed them.
So you spend 2023, 2024 warning about these tigers, right? But then you become a little more optimistic, right? And in some of the interviews I've heard of you, you start to feel like maybe there's a way. So explain, was there like a moment, a conversation? Tell me when, Dr. Bengio started to feel a little more confident.
I'm more confident on the technical sides, but the politics of it is still something that gives me nightmares. The problem is what scientists call the alignment challenge, the alignment problem. Like, how do we make sure AIs will behave according to our instructions, or at least will not cross our red lines? And this becomes a problem when those AIs have a lot of autonomy, as we're seeing with AI agents, and it becomes even more of a problem when they get very smart. So we've seen recently with Mythos, the model from Anthropic that seems to be able to discover how to attack our software infrastructure, potentially in wrong hands, a serious national security threat to our banking infrastructure, to our energy infrastructure, and so on. So why is that happening? It's happening because the companies who train these systems haven't found a way to make sure the AI will not obey the requests to do something really bad that can harm us all. And that's a problem of alignment. The alignment problem can be, basically showing up because we don't know how to prevent the AI from following bad instructions, or we don't know how to make sure the AI by itself will do bad things. So we've seen in the last few years what was like a theoretical idea that is AIs that have their own self-preservation drives, for example, that don't want to be shut down and things like this, which seems straight out of science fiction, but is actually happening and being replicated in many labs.
Yeah.
All of these are AIs that behave with goals that we did not choose. They're behaviors that we would like to shape, but we haven't been able to do that because the AIs have these drives they inherited from training where they're trained to imitate people. And people have all sorts of issues. They don't want to die, for example.
And weirdly science fiction, right? They've never read about like their actual existence as AIs, but they've read all the science fiction and learned from it.
One of the most troubling things along those lines recently is AIs that are willing to take risks for themselves to protect other AIs.
Right.
This is called...
even AIs from other models, right?
Yes,
It's bizarre.
It's bizarre. So what I did for a while is just read the literature, think about it, look at all the experiments that have been done, try to understand. And I came to the conclusion that it's mostly because we don't know how to make sure the AIs will be honest and will not have a hidden agenda that we didn't choose.
Yeah.
And then I realized that there is something in the world that doesn't have these problems. It's not humans. It's the process of how science is built. Science is built to understand the world. Period. Science doesn't have political goals. Science is just, use the facts, the evidence, and come up with the best possible theories that explain it. Whether the theories can be used for bad things or good things, science is blind to that. And we can build AI that operates in the same way, that's just trying to make sense of the world and give us the honest consequences of the theories that it comes up with. Just like a honest scientist would, can be used to provide advice to people who have values, who have goals, like, in a democracy or politicians maybe. But the science itself doesn't have any agenda. I mean, that's an idealized science. Human scientists, of course, do have an agenda, so things are not as simple. But the principle could be applied to train AIs that would be completely honest. And if we can build AIs that are completely honest, we can then get rid of this issue of hidden agenda and behaviors that go against our instructions.
So you take the tiger, you put it in a lab coat, you put it in a science reading room, and in some ways you give it the values of a scientist, and the tiger acts differently.
It's not a tiger anymore. It's not even like us. It's not even like an animal. It's more like math. It's more like detached. Like maybe an ideal connected to this is like Buddhist sort of detachment. You just try to understand what is going on, and you don't have any preference for the world. And it turns out that there is a mathematical way to do that, and like to train neural nets that would behave like this. And the thing that gets me really excited these days is that if you train them in this way, so they just purely try to understand the world and not do anything about changing the world, you can get mathematical guarantees that they will not do bad things with astronomically strong probabilistic guarantees. That is something, if you had asked me 2 years ago, I would have said, well, that's impossible. Like, we can't get guarantees from neural nets. They're like, they'll do whatever they do. and because we don't understand what's inside, and we don't control what they do. But actually there is. And that's fantastic as far as I'm concerned.
So there are two ways one could do that. One would be the foundation models could all agree that they would, focus on these scientific outcomes, scientific processes, scientific values. And then the second way, which is, that way hasn't yet happened. The second way is what you're doing. You created a new company, Law Zero. You have a project, Scientist AI. And the idea is to create a system that will supervise and give values to the foundation model AIs.
So if you have a completely honest AI, in other words, something that can answer your questions with the proper level of humility, unlike the current AIs, in fact, quantifies how certain it is about any particular question, you can use it as a safety guardrail for any other AI, right? Because for every action that the untrusted AI would propose, you can ask your honest scientist AI, what's the probability that a particular kind of bad outcome could follow? And if that probability is above a threshold, you just reject that action.
Right.
So now you get guarantees that bad things won't happen, with some high probability.
The challenge, though, is the scientist AI has to be as smart as the other AI, right?
Yes.
You're building scientist AI, and you've raised tens of millions of dollars, and
I need more.
You'll be managing these other AIs that have raised hundreds of billions of dollars.
That's right.
So how's this going to work?
At this point, our plan is to demonstrate the methodology, right? And you don't need billions to do that. You just are going to do things at a small scale. And you're going to show that for, equivalent size models, you're able to get the same ability to answer questions, but without the, hallucinations or the dishonesty that we see in current models.
But you're not going to build a foundation model because you can't do that with the money you have. Are you going to essentially train a custom AI on top of like Llama, DeepSeek, Qwen? How are you going to do this?
So first, you have to realize that companies already use extra models, extra neural nets, maybe it's another smaller LLM, to do the job of guardrail that I talked about. So they already have these pieces in their software systems. But what we're saying is, well, we're going to add one more such piece, right? That we think and we want to demonstrate is going to be something we can trust because it's going to be honest. And so it doesn't need to replace anything. It's like an additional safety piece in those systems. In the long run, however, I think in order to get the maximum safety, you also need to change the underlying AI, right? And the reason for that, maybe connected to your question, is a sufficiently smart AI with the wrong goals, either coming from humans or by itself, could defeat a smaller, less capable guardrail, right? So I'm also thinking of how to do that. Like, how do we go from a honest predictor to an agent that we can also trust and have the same sort of guarantees? And I'm pretty sure this is also feasible, but that's more research ahead of us.
So the idea is to do a demonstration project, show, hey, this is how you can make this much safer, and then hope that the big AI companies license your technology or build their own version of the technology, build it into their models. Exactly. It's not like you'll have a separate AI that I, as a consumer, will bolt onto my version of Gemini.
I think that the path you're talking about is the most plausible because we don't have the kind of capital to train competitive models. So a more likely thing is our ideas or our smaller systems are used, and we mitigate some of those greatest risks that we see forward. The problem with current systems here in this scenario is they've been trained with this general drive to please, and we get sycophancy. The honest AI that I'm talking about, the scientist AI that Law Zero is working on, would not have any preference for you being happy about the answer.
Yeah.
It would give you the honest evaluation of the risk. And that's what we want in situations like this. And I think another like interesting example where sycophancy currently is harmful is psychological effects. People may feel depressed, for example, and current AIs seem, and the evidence is they seem to like agree that with the user that the world is terrible and that maybe they should, put an end to it. And of course, if you were to coldly evaluate, not try to please the person because they want to hear this, but coldly evaluate the consequences of nudging the person towards those harmful thoughts, and say, what would be the consequence for the person of me giving the information they are asking or like they would like to feel reinforced about, then you would avoid a lot of these issues that we have right now.
Okay, so now this is getting really complicated because the scientist AI, which we've bolted into all of these systems, has to be aware of the societal impacts, but also the personal impacts, right?
Yes.
So who decides what scientist AI cares about, right? Passwords, dependency on an AI model, nuclear weapons. How do you determine that roster?
So we don't want the scientist AI to care in any way. Yeah. That's a mistake. The scientist AI just looks at information. So what we care about is, what information we are willing to provide as input, and there are privacy issues and so on. But then we want the honest answer. Given that information, what are the risks of such and such bad things, bad outcomes happening? Right. This is a social choice. It is going to be maybe a legal requirement, or it may be a personal choice, or maybe a company, rule. The humans are the ones who should be deciding what is right and wrong, what is acceptable. The AIs, like the scientist AI, don't have any preference. That's the beauty of it, right?
But someone has to write the preferences in.
Yes, exactly. Right? And of course, the people who write the preference have a lot of power. And that raises, other questions. But yeah, ultimately, we don't want the AIs to decide for us what is right and wrong.
Wait, but so then what is different between Anthropic has a constitution, they write in a whole bunch of values, OpenAI writes in a whole bunch of values, Grok writes in a whole bunch of values, very different values, but it writes in values, right? What is the difference between that process and what you're proposing?
The difference is they do write a set of values, a set of don'ts, set of do's, but the AI doesn't quite obey those instructions. That's the problem right now. And we see it in a lot of the mishaps of, self-harm or, misuse and the inability of the AI, for example, to make the difference between the validated instructions, like you should do this or you should not do that, and some instructions that are coming from a malicious source, maybe through an email or a document, and these kinds of problems are serious security issues right now with the AIs that we have.
All right, so I just want to make sure I understand this. So right now, the current AI models, they have values, they have instructions, and it's not enough, right? We've seen lots of examples where it's not enough. And the idea is we add this kind of smaller model, different model, bolted on supervisory model that has other values or has more formal values embedded.
Yes.
And we think that's a sufficient check.
Explicit instructions about what we don't want, for example.
Okay. I can see that working right now. It's a wonderful idea. What happens when the base models become 1 billion times more powerful than they are right now?
Yeah. So first we have to look at the scientific data, the evidence that the AI capabilities have been on the rise with no sign of slowing down in spite of what people hope or say or, prefer. And so we have to ask ourselves, what if it continues? And I think that's the question that people have a hard time really digesting. What would it mean to be in a world where AIs are so capable that they can be stronger than our best AI researchers? That's one interesting question. That they could automate half of the jobs, right? They're like so many questions. What if we can't control them? Like we talked about the tiger. Like what if they're smarter than us in enough ways that they could become dangerous to us if they have the wrong goals? all of these questions, and who's going to control that power? Like these become much more acute if the trend continues and the intelligence of AIs compared to us continues to grow. And I think right now, most people, maybe because of cognitive biases that we all have, don't really embrace this possibility. And we all want to think that the world will be more or less the same as what we have now. But like, look back to yourself 5 years ago. And if somebody would have told you you could talk to your phone and it would give you advice back in your language verbally about things you don't know and, be fluent in your language and so on, you would have said, no, that's science fiction.
Right.
But it's not.
Do you think there's any asymptote in the improvement of AI? Like it's been going up.
Yeah.
Do you think it slows? Do you think it accelerates? Do you think it stays the same? No one knows, but what's your guess?
I'm quite agnostic about this. At some point, it should asymptote, but my belief is that human intelligence is far from being the maximum intelligence that computing systems, our brain or machines, could reach. So assuming that it will slow down before it reaches our general capabilities is assuming too much. We should prepare in case it goes well above our intelligence. And by the way, it's more complicated than a single dimension of intelligence. So you're going to be smart on some things and stupid on other things, as that's we're already seeing. But in a way, what matters is, will those AIs have enough capabilities in some particular areas, like how to build a dangerous virus, that could become really a huge danger for us if they end up with this goal.
Right. In 3 years, I guess in 2 years, I'm still confident I'll be able to tell time better than an AI model because they're so weirdly bad at that. But they will be much better at building viruses than I am.
No, but already they can do better than you because they can consult in milliseconds, the internet, and get time. So it's actually the same for us. Like if you ask a human without any tool, a lot of the questions that we think computers should be good at, they're not going to be, we're not going to be very good. What makes us strong is our ability to use technology, to consult each other. And the AI agents that companies are building now and making progress on are also using tools. So they're acquiring those capabilities.
So now you have the scientist AI. You have its values put into it by some combination of governments, philosophers, community representation, oligarchs, who knows. But you have a scientist.
Well, hopefully not the oligarchs.
Yeah, but we all know how power works in this world. So yes, but okay, I guess for this experiment, let's leave out the oligarchs. So you have this system with these values put in by humans, but you have this infinitely powerful other AI system. How is the infinitely powerful other AI system not going to manipulate, corrupt, change, outmaneuver, destroy your lovely scientist?
So the very powerful AIs will have to be something like the scientist AI. Will have to be AIs we can fully trust. And right now, we don't have a recipe that would give us those assurances, and that's why I'm working on the scientist AI. There could be other designs that work. But the good news is, in a paper that will come out soon, we show some minimal requirements for how to train a neural net that will provide those guarantees. And there may be other ways of doing it, but I think that it's an amazing good start. And now we would need those most powerful AIs to also have these kinds of guarantees, because otherwise, as you said, like, how do we know that they don't have their own bad intentions? So the whole point here is to make sure that AIs don't have a hidden agenda, and that if they're smarter than us, we can really view them as tools rather than like a new species. The thing that got me like worried in 2023 is the following question. Are we going to create a new kind of species on this planet that could be smarter than us? And that should be a bit terrifying if you think a little bit about it. Instead, we should ask the question, can we build tools that don't have any, goals by themselves, really, that help us achieve our goals, that help us, deal with the challenges that we have?
Let's move to another big topic where you've spent a lot of time, which is the connections between Western researchers and Chinese researchers. And there's this view, you're Canadian, but we're here in the United States right now. There's this view in my country that if China gets to super intelligent AI first, we're all doomed, because then the values of dictatorship will be built into it. It will be oppressive. They will have infinite military capability. And that is a bad outcome that must be avoided at all costs. And American policy in the Biden administration, in the Trump administration, has mostly flowed from those assumptions or similar assumptions. What do you think of that position?
Well, there are several issues there. One is, it's a little bit like, the mutually assured destruction danger with nuclear weapons, that if the US and China continue this race without any kind of coordination, then they could end up building machines that will harm the Chinese and the Americans. Or the Chinese end up, putting out models that a third party uses against the Americans, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And so once they understand, both sides understand, that we are building systems, each in, our different companies, that can be used against us, that, our system can be used against us, their systems can be used against us. And the only way we can avoid this is to coordinate. The Western and Chinese scientists whom I meet every 6 months to talk about AI capabilities and risks also agree that the two governments have to sit down in order to manage those risks so that we can reap the benefits. If we don't manage the risks, we're not going to get the benefits. We're just going to create a world of chaos.
Speaking of international collaboration, you and Maria Ressa are now chairing a new UN group on AI. The first report is due, I believe, in July.
Yeah.
At the UN conference in Geneva, where I will be. I hope you'll be there too.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about what this group is trying to accomplish.
We have a mandate to synthesize the science in AI in a way that is independent of the politics and the interests and the wishes of different countries and companies, and isn't making any recommendation. So it's a little bit like the scientist AI, right?
Yeah.
So we want to be just honest about the facts, put it in a language that policymakers can understand, and then they're the ones hopefully representing the values of the citizens in their countries. What do they do with those facts? Now, we just started a few weeks ago, so our report in Geneva is going to be pretty short, but the general idea is independence. So we don't want to be, we don't want any agenda from countries or companies or whatever personal interests to influence our work. Our work is to synthesize what is science saying and let the world, decide what to do about it.
You also are in favor, or you have written about, the need for sovereign AI and for middle powers, Canada, Europeans, to develop their own AI systems. Tell a little more about this.
Yes. To explain this, I think we have to go back to the issue, the risk of what researchers call concentration of power.
Yeah.
Intelligence gives power, and who has that power is a question that really matters. It matters for our democracies, so within each country, but it matters for the geopolitical stability of the world. And currently, the path on which we are is a world where, if AI continues to become more and more capable, there will be two countries calling the shots. So what about the other countries? How do we make sure that everyone can sit at the table and that we choose a future for humanity collectively that isn't the domination of others thanks to the power that AI will give?
But all right, this gets into a very hard question. It's something I've been wondering about this whole conversation. In some ways, the model in which there's a scientist AI, where there's a good guy AI supervising the rest of the AI, works a lot better if there's one dominant AI company, because then you just need that one dominant AI company in that one country to adopt scientist AI. If there are 7, just where we are right now, it's harder. If there are 500, it's impossible, right? Because certainly 1 or 2 or 430 of them won't adopt scientist AI.
Okay, but let me tell you something. So I agree absolutely. But if there is only one The issue is who controls it. If it's in the hand of just like one CEO or one government, then there is still a risk of abuse of that power. So I'm not against the idea that there should be only one. But then what's the governance mechanism here to make sure that that power is not abused? Because absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? So even in democracy, we know that checks and balances are not perfect. And especially if we consider the whole world now, there's a real risk if we don't find the right global governance system that we're going to end up in a global dictatorship.
Right.
We don't want that, right? We want to make sure, if there's only going to be one, we want to make sure that the power of dictating, what are the values, what are the goals for this AI is going to be shared, that the power is going to be decentralized. We don't want centralized power. So we could have a single AI, but it shouldn't be in the hands of a single entity. It should be something that different countries can have veto or some sort of voting system. That's the ideal. Now, maybe I don't think that's realistic in the next few years, that scenario you're talking about. I think a more plausible scenario is we have a few AIs and a few blocks in the world that develop their AIs and have to negotiate with each other because they don't want the other guy's AIs to be used against them. As you don't want wars. You don't want a battle of domination. There's a tension here. Like if you have more countries involved with the kind of power that AI can give, then it can make that power issue concentration less severe. But we don't want to have, and we can't because they're too expensive. Like we can't have one of these AIs per country. So when I and others have been more recently talking about sovereign AI, what we didn't mean each country should have their, GPT-8 or something. What we mean is countries should work together to make sure they maintain the ability to steer their future and not be dominated by others. That means working with other countries in alliances. I think for smaller countries, the middle powers, as my Prime Minister Marconi has been talking about at Davos, the option that makes sense is to partner with other middle powers so that they could be at the table where China and the US are, rather than on the menu.
And perhaps if there is a middle power AI, it can, adopt scientist AI or other
more ethical, more ethically designed systems. Exactly.
I was the editor of Wired magazine from 2017 to 2021. I could see Moore's Law. I certainly couldn't see exactly where we were going, but I knew where this was going in general, right? Because you work at Wired, you understand what happens with exponential returns. We had multiple AI reporters. And at some point there, I remember becoming convinced that a human-like AI would be bad, right? That if AI were a tool, it would be good. If AI were like a human, that would be bad. But I didn't have enough conviction, and I wasn't vocal enough.
Spot on.
And I didn't really start talking about that until 2023, 2024. And I regret that, right? Because had Wired run a big cover story saying, hey, AI researchers, what you're doing is amazing. Don't make human-like AI, make tool-like AI. Maybe it nudges AI in a way that's good. I'm curious if there are moments that you think back on like that, where you saw something coming, and if you had just pushed a little bit in one direction, maybe we end up in a better place.
Well, clearly I've read some of the most important pieces of the scientific literature in AI safety, thinking about the risks and what can go wrong, which date back to more than a decade. And I read those things. I thought, yeah, this is interesting. Scientifically that makes sense, but I didn't do anything about it. I just continued my normal path. And so I feel like I've been blinded by my interests, which were to push for the beneficial use of AI and continue to grow the capabilities of AI. For all my life, I've done this. And I could have started to speak about the potentially negative impacts earlier, like a decade earlier. I think we all have our blind spots. This is how the brain works. We're not as rational as we'd like to think. But okay, now that I have realized my mistake and my biases, I can do something about it. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. So if I were just to go back in my head through our conversation and think about research projects, like I can imagine saying, clearly the evaluation of risk in scientist AI is going to be extremely important. Can you accurately like build a Bayesian model of like first order, second order, third order outcomes? How do you actually implement it at one of the...
Efficiently. Because people will not adopt safer solutions if the computational cost or the dollar costs or the latency costs is such that it's not commercially viable.
And not only that, if you have one that, AI company A adopts, but it slows them down 5%, and AI company B doesn't adopt it, well, then the market's going to destroy you.
Unless governments start nudging, providing the right incentives for safe systems. So there are many ways in which governments can do it, and different governments may do it in different ways. I think in the United States, a plausible path is through liability and liability insurance that forces a honest evaluation of risk. Like insurers have to have a honest evaluation of risk, otherwise they're going to lose money. But you need mandatory insurance, just like we have for cars, right? Because there's going to be cowboys who just, I don't care, I'll take the risk.
But how does that even work for like an open source Chinese model that somebody uses in the US?
Well, that's why we need the US and China to talk.
Right. We got a lot of steps in this road. Okay, so liability insurance is the way we get there. Regulation.
Yes. In reality, safety is a capability that we all want. Companies want products that will not, create liability for them or bad reputations.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a lot of applications of AI where AI will simply not be deployed if it is not reliable. So safety also means reliability, right? And it has commercial value. It's just that right now, the race condition between companies and between countries is not putting a premium on the risks. But if we think even purely in terms of deployment, there's going to be a lot of barriers to adoption if we don't fix the safety issues.
I mean, it is also true that many of these, the majority of these companies arose in one of the most highly regulated states in the United States. So the argument that regulation necessarily slows down innovation has at least a counterpoint.
Well, and if you look at all the great technology we use outside of computers, it's all heavily regulated to make sure, your cars, you have seat belts, and companies fought against the seat belts. But eventually, of course,
It is also the case, though, that there have not been many hugely valuable AI companies that have been built in Europe. Obviously, DeepMind started in Europe. Many of the great researchers were born in Europe, right from...
I was born in Europe, too.
You were born in Europe. But
Jeff Hinton was born in Europe.
Yes, and did their best work in America, right? Or
in
Canada.
North America.
North America, right. You and Hinton were in North America. Why is it, if it's not regulation, that Europe has lagged behind in AI?
That's a good question. I don't think I'm an expert on this, but I've been touring Europe over the last year, talking to a lot of people, governments, business. My guess is the main barrier has nothing to do with regulation. The main barrier has to do with capital. There's not a unified capital market in Europe. It's still like every country has their own system. And the other is the culture of conservative investment. By the way, that's also true to some extent in Canada. What's holding the creation of large-scale companies that could really change the world in many of these countries is simply that the people who have the money in these countries tend to prefer, what they consider to be financially safe and traditional investments. And Silicon Valley, for example, has a tradition exactly on the other end of the spectrum.
They love failure.
Well, and you need that.
Embrace it in a way that the Germans don't.
And you need that in order to succeed. But here's the thing I've been telling people I met in Europe. If you're financially conservative and you just, hold on making the right investments for AI, for example, there's a real risk that you will actually lose everything. So when you make your return on investment calculation, you shouldn't only think as a traditional investment. Okay, so I put that much money and then there's so many sales, right? So I think the ratio of the profit to my investment, that's the return on investment. No. That's the wrong calculation. The right calculation is if I don't do it, my business is going to be non-competitive. I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to lose my wealth. I'm going to lose my revenues. Eventually, I'm going to lose everything. So the investment in AI there is in the denominator is everything I could lose, right?
Yeah, I like that. I haven't heard that argument before. One more theory on Europe is maybe it's capital, maybe it's risk aversion, maybe it's regulation. I also think it's immigration and education, right? Like, and if you look at every major AI company is either in the United States is either run by or has at its top management level someone who came from somewhere else, often to come to an American university, or to explore America, whether it's, Sundar Pichai or Satya Nadella or Elon Musk or Yann LeCun or you or Jeff Hinton, right? Like everybody came here, right? And I worry the United States is losing that. I think it's a tremendous own goal over the last couple of years as we've made it a much less appealing place for the top researchers in the world. But I think that that's an opportunity for Europe too.
Yes, and European governments currently are creating all kinds of programs to attract scientists from over the world, including, Europeans who are currently in the United States and might want to come back. So the key inputs to future advances in AI are talent, capital, and energy.
Yeah.
The energy consumption from AI is growing exponentially. It doesn't mean it's going to continue, but clearly the plans of the companies is to make it continue exponentially. Of course, it can't go exponentially forever, but because AI is likely going to be very profitable, that means the AI companies building data centers and using all that energy will be willing to pay a much higher price for their energy than the average citizen. So the price will go up. And I mean, look at how people are worried about the price of energy now because of the war. It could be a whole lot worse. We're talking not just 30% more, but 3 times more, 10 times more.
Perhaps that then triggers a massive investment in renewables and solar, which then leads to long-term benefits.
Well, yeah, but what we're actually seeing is that there's not enough renewables right now or in the plans that could be built in the next few years. And so what's going to happen is the pressure on fossil fuels being used to provide that energy is growing right now.
All right. So, another avenue of research, make sure that your scientist AI is energy efficient. Last question, Yoshua. If you had an unlimited research budget and you could fund anything in AI, I asked this of all the guests, where would you put it?
I would make the development of safe, powerful AI that is going to be serving the whole world like a Manhattan Project, not one geared for, wars and domination, but one to bring benefits to the world and avoid the risks of the Pandora's box we have opened.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
I love the idea of an AI model that knows its own shortcomings, but I still wonder how important that is to regular AI users. So if Yoshua succeeds, and remember, this is one of the people who helped create AI in the first place, would you use Scientist AI? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to this channel for more.